Hello, my name is Rick. Welcome to episode 2 of my Dwarf Fortress trade tutorial series. In this episode, I'll be talking about how to set up an Embark that makes good use of this trade theory. I will talk about which things I do mostly for fun or role-playing reasons, and which ones have an effect on the game. I will also talk about the many different possible Embark conditions and the different approaches people take while playing them. The short version of my idea is, set up your starting 7 dwarves with some stone crafters and gem cutters and setters and a dedicated trader. Here's the slightly longer version. I've set up a small demonstration world. Let's jump into the Embark. Fantastic. Your selected civilization is dead or dying. Your dwarves might assume important positions. Yeah, actually, I kind of suspected that. Oh, we must prepare for the journey carefully. I mean, that's the whole point here. Before I do anything with the dwarves, I like to switch over to the items and set myself up with a few I know I always want, and get rid of a few I always know that I don't want. I usually start out in Embarks that have at least some trees with them, and because of that, I like to get rid of all the wood items that your guys tend to start with, because they can easily be made instantly the moment you get there, and some of these things are rather expensive. So, very first thing I always like to do, get rid of the step ladder, get rid of the wheelbarrow, get rid of the crutches, the splints, the buckets. I'm also going to go in and I'm going to delete the dimple cup spawn, because I don't intend to dye any cloth ever. And there's a couple more points for the Embark. Now, I know I'm going to want to bring a few animals, because I always do. I always like to get 2 male cats. If we need more, I figure the migrants will bring them, or we can always trade for them, so 2 is enough. I always like to get 3 or 4 dogs. There's no point in getting war dogs now, because you can train them up nearly instantly when you arrive, so you can save a few points by just getting ordinary dogs and training them to be hunting or dogs or war dogs yourself. In this case, I'm going to get 2 female dogs and just 1 male dog for now. I'm also going to get 3 turkeys. And they're way down here. The longer I play Dwarf Fortress, the more picks I like to bring at the start. Currently I'm up to 3. Because I usually embark in fairly hostile environments, I always like to bring along 1 starting crossbow and a precious couple of bolts, so I'm going to add that on now. I'm going to go for a copper crossbow because it's the cheapest. So I've ordered up a mere 10 copper bolts. I have no intention of going hunting with these. They're just for the event of an emergency right away on an Embark, which does happen sometimes. For the price of a couple of pieces of string, you can have sort of insurance against fey moods. In case you come up against a dwarf who has a fey mood that requires a very specific piece of cloth or string, buying just 2 of each type will help you with your first several fey modes, because most of them won't need those things. So I see these guys already start with pigtail thread, so I'm going to add on a couple of the other kinds if I can. So now I've spent a few of our precious points on some cave spider silk thread and some sheep wool yarn, but now we're covered for 6 fey moods that require string or cloth of some kind, or more if you count the pigtail ones we had anyways. But now what I've done is I've gotten rid of some expensive things we didn't need at the start of our embark, and I'm bringing very important creatures and equipment and tools. So everything I've done so far has an effect on the game. The animals in the game are relatively expensive, which is why I'm not bringing more of them, but they're also powerful. They have quite an effect on the game in the form of providing food and leather. Once I've mostly set up the dwarves, I usually come back to equipment and I will tack on a couple of more plump helmet spawn just to get a faster start with that, and maybe a little bit more food and drink depending on how much points is left over. But let's switch over to the dwarves for now. I usually embark in pretty hostile terrains, so I tend to bring one dedicated crossbow user and someone who's either good with an axe or a hammer, depending on preference of theirs. Myself, I like the axe just slightly better, but if I see someone who likes hammers, it will give them a happy thought when they pick it up and practice with it. And so I would then add a hammer to the equipment list and make someone who is good at hammering. So uh, the military dwarves, the only thing you can do that makes much difference with them is if you have dwarves that are highly agile, they'll be better at dodging. If you have dwarves that are stronger, they'll do more damage when they hit. Having dwarves with more endurance will allow them to run farther or chase things down better. But most of those don't really make much of a difference because any dwarf can be trained to be a fairly competent military dwarf in a couple of years. So about the only difference you can make is I like to find ones that are highly agile and make them be my crossbow users. And I like ones that are highly agile or strong and make them be my axe or hammer guys at the start of the embark. To me, one of the few things you can do to have an edge on surviving in the game is to have at least a couple dwarves who are pretty good combatants right away at the start. Specifically when it comes to hitting things and when it comes to dodging things. I feel like dodging is life for a military dwarf. So I found the two most qualified for military service. They're both women, so be it. Them's the breaks. And here's how I set them up. For me, this is absolutely standard. Because Ast here was very agile. She was naturally the most qualified to be a crossbow user. So what I've done is I went in and set her to be competent at crossbows, single level in shield and armor use, competent at dodging, and then also a level in discipline because she needs to not be running away from monsters that we're fighting, and a single level in teacher to give her a head start, with the idea being the first of the military dwarves will be the heads of the different companies that they will command, and therefore they will teach the dwarves under them. Very similarly, Doran, the peasant here, was both very agile and mighty and quick to heal. So naturally, she was extremely qualified to be the axe user of the fort. She doesn't value axes, unfortunately. She does value people who take the time to master a skill and deeply respects those that work hard at their labors. So I'm hoping that's what she will do the same. She's set up to be single level teacher, single level discipline, a competent dodger, single level in armor use and shield use, and the competent axe user. So 2 out of the 7 dwarves, all they do in the world is military combat related things. But they should be pretty good at that for starting dwarves. The next and almost last thing I do that has much effect on the game is I pick out 4 people to do the various administrative jobs in the fort. The really important one being the trader. They need to have adequate trading skills right away to make my idea work at its very best. And you also don't want those 4 administrative jobs to all be on the same dwarf in case that's the one that gets killed, or also for other reasons, as I mentioned in my previous video. However, since I expect the overlap between people who will watch the 2 videos to be kind of small, here they are anyways. Your leader will be the negotiator. When a caravan arrives, it will often come with a diplomat from the foreign country, and if your leader is the same person as the trader, they will not go to the trade depot first, they will go to talk to the diplomat first, and trade only second. And that cuts into the possible amount of time that you can spend trading with them. So that's why you don't want to have those 2 be the same. I have chosen Solon, the peasant here, to be the trader for the fort, because she was she had a good feel for social relationships, which was good enough for me. There really isn't a prerequisite stat for being a good trader. Just like there isn't really a stat I look for to be a manager or a leader. It doesn't really make much difference in the game. I do a lot of these things just for fun or for role-playing reasons or because I think it's funny. But again, here's one of the few things that does have an effect on the game, is as our trader, I have made her be an adequate appraiser, which is 2 levels into it. You really only need 1, you just need novice or better to see what the value of items is on the trade screen, but that's what's so important to be able to do right away. And to do that with certainty, you have to have 1 person with that skill here. I've also given her a level in Judge of Intent, so she's got a head start on seeing what mood the traders are in, if they're happy or sad with the way things are going. It's not really necessary, it's not going to have a big effect on the game, but it's one of the few things that you can do, so I'm doing it. For a leader, I usually pick one with a keen intellect or some kind of understanding of people. Putting levels in the skill leader makes the game lean towards making that dwarf the expedition leader, but what really matters is their social skills. If a dwarf on the starting list says they think they are important in the grand scheme of things, it amuses me to make them the leader. Hey, maybe they're right. Again, I'm doing this just for fun. This is purely just for role-playing reasons. I don't think you can really control which dwarf has what social skills, so in a way the dwarves tend to decide for themselves who the leader is, no matter what you do. You can slant this by giving one dwarf levels in leadership and any other social skills, but that control is not perfect. Here I have chosen Rovad from among the other dwarfs to be the leader because they had great analytical abilities, but also because nothing about the other dwarves really jumped out at me for leadership qualities of any kind. However, I'm not going nuts with it. I have given him a single level in leader and a single level in liar, and if someone else has more social skills, so be it. That's fine by me. Okay, I see Rovad also has very good creativity, which means he's going to be one of the fort's stone crafters and gem setters and engravers. So now I've done that. I put 2 levels into stone crafting and 2 into gem setting and 1 into engraving, and he's still got 3 points left for whatever random things come along. We'll decide once some of the other dwarves are more set up. Dodak here has very good focus, so I'm going to make them to be the bookkeeper, and to remind myself of that, I'm giving them a single level in record keeping, so when the time comes, the game will tell me, hey, they're the only one who has any ability at that, and I'll know it was meant to be them. Irvad here has a great feel for social relationships and a great deal of patience and good intuition. So I'm going to make them be the manager. And to remind me of that fact, I'm going to give them a single level in organizing, because now the game will recommend them for that when the time comes in Fortress mode. So at this point, we have two military dwarves. We have a leader, a manager, a bookkeeper, and a trader. So that means whoever is left gets to be the doctor, whether they're any good at it or want to be or not. So I've picked out the remaining dwarf to be the doctor. I've given them a single level in all the doctoring things that I could find, plus one extra level in diagnostician, with the hopes that they'll do it just slightly faster or better. And here's hoping they don't have to get too much practice. But let's face it, they always do. Because I take people with these skills, quite frequently the game will send migrants, even in the first few waves, who are better. I'm not sentimental about who gets these jobs. If the game sends you a better trader or doctor or whatever, swap out the old ones and put in the new ones immediately. Lately, I tend to take 2 miners with some starting level of skill and 3 picks. I know there's a great deal of debate about how many miners to start with. A lot of people spend no points on this because it's a skill that levels up fast. If they are busy, you can have skilled miners in a couple of seasons. There is a certain efficiency to this. It saves points that can be spent on other things. Like every aspect in the game, it comes down to personal preference and playstyle. My trade theory goes like this. You're going to be making things right away. Why not make nicer versions of all things right away? I get 2 starting miners because they can mine slightly faster and get the base dug out faster. We can do everything in the base just slightly sooner because we have the rooms dug out that much faster. I pick out a dwarf with good creativity and make them a stonecrafter and engraver. I usually get 2 skilled stonecrafters, a gem cutter, a gem setter, maybe 1 dwarf with some carpentry. I usually get 1 mason, 1 dwarf with some levels of farming or plant gathering, maybe fishing. I usually get some with levels of brewing or cooking, but I don't put a whole lot of points into that, or none at all, if I want to spend those same points on something more important. At this point, I'm also not fussy about which dwarf gets what skill. It doesn't really make much difference at this point. The military ones have all their points spent, so they aren't going to be the miners. Usually I get a dwarf with some levels in armor smithing and weapon crafting. In this case, I felt I had a few levels to spare and gave them 2 of each. So now I've gone and done that. I've set up my dwarves the way I like them. I've assigned a couple miners, a couple brewers, farmers, plant gatherers, things like that. So here's how that shook out. Here we have the crossbow user. Here we have Dodak. They are a novice carpenter, adequate mason, adequate stonecrafter and gem cutter, and a novice fisherman, just so we'd have one. They are also the bookkeeper. And we have Irvad, who is an adequate miner, weaponsmith, and armorsmith. They are a novice mechanic, just so we'd have one. And they are also the manager. And we have Shem, the peasant, who is an adequate miner, adequate grower, and also the doctor. We have Rovad, who is a novice woodcutter, just so we'd have one, a novice engraver, stonecrafter, and gem setter. Here we have Rovad, who is a novice woodcutter, just so we'd have one, a novice engraver, stonecrafter, and gem setter, not because they were particularly creative, but because they weren't uncreative, and we needed somebody to be our second stonecrafter. And they're also the leader of the fort, with 1 level in leading and 1 level in liar. Maybe, we'll see. The dwarves still might pick someone else. This is Solon. they are our future trader, and they also ended up having a level of brewer and cook, and they're an adequate grower. And last but not least is Doran, the peasant, who is our competent axe user. Now, sometimes I would actually put a level of ambushing on the crossbow user and assign them a hunting dog and let them be a hunter as well as the crossbow user. I'm not doing that in this particular case. I know it's kind of controversial, but in the past, some of my best crossbow using people have been hunters. And the thing is, if your fort is set up so that they can change armor quickly or change uniforms, it's not the huge problem it otherwise is in other people's less efficient sprawling forts, for instance. Yeah, it's a problem, but it's one that you can deal with a little bit of planning and efficiency. A problem which this time around I'm going to skip entirely by not doing it. Having spent a lot on my dwarves' skills, most of them are usually maxed out on points, so I will never have that many points for bringing objects along. I always like to bring a little bit of extra plump helmet spawn because it allows your initial farming efforts to get started just slightly faster. I'm just going to double the amount from 5 to 10. I'm going to bump up the food and drink just a little bit. I'm also buying a few extra pigtail seeds because I'm finding myself using those more and more now. At this point, I don't really have enough points left to do anything expensive. So I think I'm just going to max out on a tiny bit more food and drink, and that's going to be it. You could min-max this list much more than I'm doing here. For instance, one way to do that would be to skip the finished goods, bring the raw materials for bronze and a little fuel, and simply make bronze picks and weapons the moment you start. This is extremely efficient in terms of getting the most out of your Embark points. I'm not an expert on this, so I'm going to refer you to the wiki or the Dwarf Fortress forums for people who are. So that's it. That's how I set up my Embarks to maximize my trade potential. If you were going into an extremely dangerous situation, say in evil territory, or right next to a tower, or were starting an Embark surrounded by goblin pits, you might want to bring some armor and more weapons. If you were playing in a world with less giant beasts and hostility turned down, maybe the crossbow and axe user are not necessary. According to the wiki, the migrants you get will be like the ones you already have, or try to fill in skill gaps for what you're missing. In my experience, this is true. I start out with guys who are good at trading and combat and tend to get more right away. If you took more different kinds of weapon skill users, it seems like the more different kinds would show up. I've actually seen this happen. I start out with people with skill in gem cutting and setting, and often more show up right away. You could use this effect to tailor the skills you give your people on Embark to the situation they are going into, or the fort you are trying to make, no matter what you want to trade for, or what the theme of your fort is. Want your fort to be a center of learning and knowledge? Make some scholars right away. Want to be more military-oriented? Make one of each type of weapon dwarf right away. Want to be traders of some kind, whether it's trade goods, armor, clothes, mugs, whatever? Give your guys the kinds of skills right at the start, and more will show up. Starting forts in more hostile conditions would call for a different approach. More fighting skills, armor and weapons right away at the start, which is kind of expensive in terms of points. But if you're trying to reclaim a fort from a monster, or start a fort in a frozen zombie-infested hellscape, then this is a sound investment in points. Even if you do start in a good environment with fairies and fluffy womblers, you could still come across a werebeast in year 1 or a forgotten beast in your cave system. Again, there's no right or wrong way to play. You could put any investment into your military or none, and just rely on walls, doors, drawbridges, and traps. A fire-breathing monster in a cave is not much of a threat if it can't get into your fort. Some people enjoy more of a challenge in their embarks, and they bring nothing, not even an anvil, or almost nothing. Some people really enjoy min-maxing the game and bring the raw materials to make what they need the moment they arrive on their embark, turning ores into picks and weapons. Some people use third-party programs to cheat on the amount of points they can start with and embark with huge amounts of stuff. I can see the appeal of all of these approaches. Even though some are polar opposites, I can see why they'd be fun to try to play. Experimenting with different ways to play creates variety and tremendous replay value. There's no real right or wrong way to do it. With such a huge amount of different possible combinations to embark with, it comes down to personal preference and tailoring your approach to the area where you are embarking. One of the things that gives Dwarf Fortress such replay value is that you can play a very different game just by changing what you embark with. If you're tired of one way, try one of the others to see if it appeals to you, or doesn't. Sometimes it will surprise you. For instance, I refused to play a fort on a site that didn't have at least some amount of iron. Then I found a map I liked, but it didn't have any. I tried it and found it kind of annoying, but not nearly as limiting as I expected. Yes, the fort had trouble getting iron armor and weapons early on, but then we traded for some, and goblins brought us some, and it wasn't really a problem after that. Rather than being kind of impossible like I expected, it just required working around some limitations. So sometimes trying a new style of play, even one you might not like, will surprise you when you find out either it's not as bad as you thought, or you might even enjoy the challenge sometimes. In my next episode, I will talk about setting up a new world and how different conditions of world setup affect trade. After that, I'm going to show how to do my more trading plan from the very start of a brand new fortress, with subscriber-submitted names. There's still room to be in the starting 7 if you're fast enough. To see how to join, watch my video about becoming a dwarf in one of my forts. I have a lot of other videos about the various sieges of Swamp Cavern, and a couple of other tutorial videos too. If you're new to my channel, check out my playlists and recent videos for more things you might enjoy. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next tutorial. If you want to be notified when new episodes come out, you have to hit that little announcement button by the subscribe button. If you found this video helpful or informative, please share, like, comment, or subscribe. Thanks for watching. Special bonus material. The group's name will be the Allegiance of Doom. But it is spring now. Enough time to delve secure lodgings, ere the Yetis get hungry. A new chapter of Dwarven history begins here at this place. Olin Bardome, geared fight, strike the earth. Okay. Can we strike it now? Oh, please tell me you're thinking about it. Oh boy. So there should be this giant cliff thing here. Oh yeah, that's pretty cliffy, all right. All right, and what else you got going on? White storks. It doesn't sound too scary. I hope they're not hostile. Yeah, that's it. No one has gone missing or died. The year is still young. Ever the pessimistic attitude, Dwarf Fortress.